Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we need to unpack something huge happening in the Middle East. If you've been keeping up with the news over the past few days, you know Washington and Riyadh just dropped a massive geopolitical bombshell. The United States has officially signed a landmark civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia, the famous 1123 agreement. Now, on the surface, civil nuclear cooperation sounds like technical jargon for power grids and light bulbs. But let's be real. In the Middle East, nuclear energy is never just about keeping the air conditioning running. The big shocker coming out of the Energy Department's announcement, and something being heavily discussed across think tanks like the Brookings Institution, the Washington Institute, and INSS in Tel Aviv, is that Washington appears to have yielded on local enrichment. For years, the US held to what non-proliferation folks call the gold standard, meaning if America helps you build reactors, you promise never to enrich your own uranium or reprocess spent fuel. That's the deal the UAE signed back in 2009. But Saudi Arabia said no thanks to the gold standard, and now Washington has paved the way for domestic enrichment on Saudi soil. So, why now? Why is the US handing over these keys? How does the ongoing war with Iran factor into this? And over on Israeli media, like Channel 12, why are warning sirens going off in the defense establishment? Let's break it all down. To understand why this nuclear deal is such a turning point, we have to look back at how the U.S. Saudi relationship was built. It all started back in 1945 aboard the USS Quincy in the Suez Canal. President Franklin D. Roosevelt met King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, creating the original Grand Bargain, American security guarantees in exchange for Saudi oil flows. For decades, that transactional foundation held up. It survived the 1973 oil embargo, the Cold War, and the 1990 Gulf War. But over the last 15 years, the rust started showing. Why? Two main reasons. First, the US shale revolution. America became the world's top oil producer, changing how Washington viewed its presence in the Gulf. Second, growing Saudi doubts. Riyadh began questioning whether the US still had its back. When Saudi Aramco facilities were struck by Iranian-backed drones and missiles in 2019, Washington's response was notably restrained. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman saw the writing on the wall. Saudi Arabia couldn't rely solely on traditional American security guarantees. This led to Riyadh's strategic pivot toward Vision 2030, a massive push to diversify the economy away from crude oil into tech, tourism, and renewables, and a policy of hedging by building stronger ties with Beijing and Moscow. When Riyadh asked Washington for nuclear technology years ago, the US insisted on the gold standard. Saudi Arabia balked, noting that if Iran was allowed to enrich uranium, Riyadh shouldn't be treated as a second-class regional power. They even floated the idea of turning to China or Russia to build their reactors. That threat forced Washington's hand. US strategists realized that if China built Saudi Arabia's nuclear infrastructure, American influence in the Gulf would drop significantly for the next half-century. So that brings us to the present moment. Why pull the trigger right now? Analysts at the Washington Institute and Brookings point to three main drivers. First, economic survival and energy transition. Saudi Arabia burns hundreds of thousands of barrels of its own crude daily just to generate electricity and power desalination plants. That's oil they could be selling on the global market. Transitioning domestic power to civilian nuclear energy frees up fossil fuels for export, generating the revenue needed to fund Vision 2030 mega projects. Second, the Iran conflict and strategic hedging. We are living through a period of open regional conflict with Iran. As Suzanne Maloney at the Brookings Institution noted recently, this war has been a double-edged sword for Gulf leaders. They see the value of the US military umbrella, but they also see its limits. MBS has stated publicly that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will have to get one too. By acquiring a full civilian nuclear fuel cycle, including domestic enrichment, Saudi Arabia achieves what experts call nuclear latency or nuclear hedging. They aren't building a bomb today, but they are acquiring the technology, infrastructure, and expertise so that if the regional balance breaks down, their breakout time drops from years to months. Third, Washington's commercial and strategic play. For the United States, this isn't just about diplomacy. It's a massive win for the US nuclear industry. Companies like Westinghouse stand to gain billions in multi-decade contracts. More importantly, it binds Saudi Arabia's high-tech supply chain to Washington instead of Beijing for the next 30 to 50 years. Now, let's pivot to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. How is this playing out in Israel? If you've been watching Israel's Channel 12 news over the last 48 hours, the mood can be summarized in one word: alarm. For a long time, the prevailing assumption in Israeli foreign policy was that a U.S. Saudi civil nuclear package would only happen as part of a grand bargain. Saudi normalization with Israel in exchange for American security pacts and nuclear tech. Israeli leadership hoped that if Saudi Arabia got nuclear tech, Washington would force them to sign the Abraham Accords and accept strict non-proliferation limits. However, recent coverage from Channel 12 and strategic assessments from Israel's Institute for National Security Studies highlight two major concerns. First is decoupling normalization. The current US administration appears to have signed this bilateral deal without requiring Saudi Arabia to simultaneously normalize ties with Israel. While American officials maintain that normalization remains a long-term goal, Riyadh secured the nuclear framework without having to make immediate concessions regarding Israel or the Palestinian issue. Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly reached out to Washington to urge that enrichment rights remain tied to diplomatic recognition, but the signed documents did not explicitly include that condition. Second is proliferation and the erosion of Israel's qualitative military edge. Israeli defense officials are deeply uneasy about domestic enrichment capability in the Middle East, even in a friendly state. As INSS researchers point out, political regimes and regional alliances can shift over multi-decade horizons. If Saudi Arabia enriches uranium, other regional actors like Turkey or Egypt may eventually demand similar privileges. This complicates Israel's long-standing policy of preventing nuclear proliferation across the region. At the same time, some Israeli strategists see a silver lining. If American firms build and operate the infrastructure alongside strict bilateral safeguards, it ensures American oversight and monitoring over Saudi facilities, which is preferable to Riyadh buying unmonitored systems from non-Western powers. So where does this leave us? We are watching a fundamental redesign of Middle Eastern security architecture. The US is shifting from acting purely as an external security policeman to becoming an embedded partner in regional energy and technological infrastructure. Saudi Arabia gets its energy diversification, regional status, and nuclear hedge. Washington keeps China at bay and secures major industrial contracts. And Israel is left recalculating its strategic position, balancing the benefits of a strong US-led bloc against the risks of a more technologically capable neighborhood. It's a high-stakes move, and Capitol Hill will certainly have plenty to say as this agreement moves through congressional review. That's all for today's episode. Hit that subscribe button, leave a review if you enjoyed the breakdown, and I'll catch you all next time. Stay curious.